Andrew Lowenthal is with us if you're just joining us on the live stream. There's lots going on in Australia, and I think this is a useful time to touch base about it because in a global context where so much is happening abroad, and we could be talking about Iran or, Trump or whatever, Australians are focused on things that are also relevant to everybody else, but just not pressing right now, like free speech, hate speech, jihadism, terrorism, cancellation, wokeness, literary festivals where people get, uninvited, gun law reform. Basically, in the wake of the Bondi terrorist attack, there's a lot of hubbub in Australia about should we, at a state or federal level, introduce more restrictions on guns. There seems to be a broad consensus that we should, except for on the conservative side of politics, the very conservative side of politics, I should say, because the mainstream Conservative Party is broadly in support of reforming gun laws to make them more strict. Then there's a parallel conversation about hate speech and free speech and what the contours of that should be. So the state government, correct me if I'm wrong in briefing any of this, wants to introduce hate speech legislation that would outlaw intimidating slogans and vilification of racial and ethnic groups. Some people who are more pro-hate speech laws and more anti-free speech want to expand that to include groups like LGBTQIA plus people. The Muslim Council of Australia wants to make sure that religion is included as a category so that it's hate speech.
Why is that blasphemy?
So that it's hate speech to criticize religions.
That is blasphemy law.
Yeah, that's a blasphemy law. Yeah, basically. And at the same time, we've also got this concurrent and supposedly unrelated, but thematically very much related brouhaha, where Australia's largest literary festival, the Adelaide Writers' Festival, has had to be cancelled after almost all of the invitees boycotted the festival and walked out just weeks before it began, because the festival uninvited a Palestinian Australian writer who had said things that were certainly anti-Zionist and probably edging up towards anti-Jewish and certainly, participating in a narrative that a lot of people who are on the more pro-Israel or pro-Jewish side of things felt was insensitive, especially in the wake of the Bondi terrorist attacks. So there's a lot of poring over the tea leaves of that and saying, should she have been cancelled? How was she cancelled? Was she and the festival board hypocrites for claiming that they're free speech warriors at the same time as they had actually already participated in cancellations of themselves of their own at the very same festival? And into this fray steps the one and only Andrew Lowenthal, carrying the flag of freedom. All the way. You've worked in Asia, you've worked in the United States, you have an online freedom network, which is called not Love, but Liebe Net, as in freedom.
Yeah, and it's for the German speakers.
That's because you're a Nazi, obviously, so you've called it a German name in the eyes of many on the left. Situate us. What should I care about in what order?
Oh, I mean, that was such a list. Even I thought there was a lot going on. I think some of that is quite pressing. I would say.
Yeah.
Although that was probably irony on your behalf. I mean,
No. I mean, I was serious in that it seems each one in isolation seems like a nothing burger in comparison to potential war with Iran, but they also touch on these very deep themes that we've all been wrestling with for the past decade.
Yeah, which is
free speech, hate speech, cancellation. What can you say? What can't you say? How should democracies tolerate extreme opinions and so on and so forth?
But also, as we were kind of saying, kind of in the hallway, I think it's actually a question about who we are, as what is an Australian, who is an Australian collectively, who are we, etc. And I think Australia is quite confused about that or grappling with that because there's a lot of kind of new things happening, a lot of conversations that didn't used to have to happen, and a lot of an extreme inability to have uncomfortable conversations. Sorry.
I mean, and not just Australians, but I mean, not just Australians. People will be watching this in America going, well, yeah, Nick Fuentes, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, what do you...
And we're obviously nowhere near as far down the kind of path of insanity as many other places in the world are, and it would be good to not go down that path, but I feel like we have taken several steps in that direction. And I think the Adelaide Festival is actually a good example of the kind of having taken too many steps down that pathway where we're essentially in this kind of proxy wars of cancellation where people are doing it on all sides. So, the person who was cancelled from the Adelaide Festival, as you mentioned, I don't think she should have been cancelled. I don't think what she says is very nice at all. Not that niceness is necessarily kind of the metric. But I mean, it's interesting that she would even fit within the Overton window because she's. I imagine there's a lot more moderate Palestinians and that could have been invited, and yet she was kind of put on the.
I'm not sure about that.
Really?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, I don't think she was beyond the pale in the sense that if you're going to pander to the anti-Zionist position, then it's very difficult to do so without it's very likely that the person is going to regard. Well, shall we just put some flesh on the bones of what it is that she said, so that we're not wrestling with a ghost here.
Yeah.
So, for people who haven't followed this, this writer, this Palestinian Australian writer, Randa Abdel Fattah, on the day after the October 7th attacks, she apparently posted an image on Facebook of a parachutist with the Palestinian flag, which seemed insensitive. In 2024, she tweeted, "The goal is decolonization and the end of this murderous Zionist colony." So, yeah, end of this murderous Zionist colony is, whilst that is obviously extreme in the sense that it's calling for a nation to be annihilated, basically, it is also consistent with the broadly accepted Palestinian view of the world, which is that it's not this isn't just about the occupation of the West Bank and the blockade of Gaza. This is fundamentally about whether or not there should be a Jewish ethno-state in the region or whether Palestinians should control that land. And in 2024, she also reshared those leaked details of 600 Australian Jews who were they were creatives and academics. They were not political activists or, political Zionists. In fact, I was added to this list for a period, and subsequently they were all doxxed as if they were, legitimate targets of hate just because they were Jewish. So she participated in that doxing. And then she and 9 other academics sent a letter to the Adelaide Festival board chair and to its director and to its CEO asking them to rescind an invitation to Thomas Friedman, the New York Times columnist. Subsequently, he was disinvited, although they said that he couldn't attend due to a scheduling clash.
Yeah, which he recently confirmed, I think, as well.
Well, no, he confirmed. They made it sound like there was a scheduling clash between his schedule and the festival. He just confirmed that he was invited and then received a follow-up email uninviting him due to a scheduling clash on their part. Right, and he said there was no scheduling clash on his part. And then the latest news this morning is that a fellow board member of the Adelaide Festival has broken ranks and said, no, actually, the board director, Louise Adler, did cancel Friedman. And
really?
That was he's broken the silence on the board thing and said that it wasn't a scheduling thing. And then Louise Adler's only response is to say, I can't believe that a board member would break the secrecy of the board, not to deny that it's that this is incredibly unprofessional of him. So when Adler, who I know a bit and who I like, and so I don't want to make it seem like I'm throwing her under the bus, but these are her words. She announced her resignation as director of the Adelaide Festival in The Guardian.
Announced. Sorry.
Right, she announced it, saying that she can't be party to the silencing of this Palestinian Australian writer. And she said, I can't be party to silencing writers, so with a heavy heart I'm resigning from my role as the director. Writers and writing matters even when they are presenting ideas that discomfort and challenge us. We need writers now more than ever as our media closes up, as our politicians grow daily more cowed by real power, as Australia grows more unjust and unequal. Which does seem hypocritical because she believes in anti-Israel positions. She, agitated for and supported and enacted the cancellation of a prominent American voice in the form of Thomas Friedman. She participated in the elevation and the platforming of an extremely anti-Israel voice, and then when that person was then cancelled against her will under supposed pressure from the governor of South Australia, who's like, the premier of South Australia, who's like the governor of an American state, and then people resigned in protest, she makes it a free speech thing, even at the same time as she's obviously participated in the same thing in the other direction. So I don't.
Well, no, and also interestingly in that letter, she kind of makes reference to, I think, psychosocial well-being, that like kind of calls for these things, or kind of safety in these spaces.
Yes, right.
Is wrong. You shouldn't call for like these spaces to be safe.
Right.
Which is exactly what progressives have been doing forever. In the last kind of 10 years, and saying, well, no, it's unsafe space. And actually, one of the other ones you could add to that list is that the same writer / activist signed the letter to cancel Deborah Conway, who's a prominent Australian pro-Israel singer.
Oh, I missed that bit. Is that
from
right?
the Perth festival, along with 500 other kind of progressives, essentially, including, I got in a kind of online spat with a friend, or I don't know what the status is anymore, because, they had essentially put up a post saying, oh, this is what's going on in Adelaide is so wrong, free speech, da-da-da-da, etc. And then I like looked at this letter and I was like, oh, you're actually on that letter kind of thing as well. So this
on
is
a letter trying to cancel a prominent
Deborah Conway
Jewish musician
from a festival.
And this is what is so tricky specifically, I think, about the case of Palestine and Israel, is that identity gets very easily confused with politics, in the sense that, not that I want to sound like I'm totally in favor of the cancellation of the Palestinian activist and writer, but she was cancelled for things she said. She wasn't cancelled for her ethnicity. Yeah. Cancelling Deborah Conway or doxing Australian Jewish creatives is cancelling them because of their ethnicity.
Yeah,
not because of things that they've said. Now,
the letter cited things that she said.
Well,
that
I
know they were ridiculous because it was saying that that was creating an unsafe space, and
it's highly likely that a Jewish person is going to have a lay left-wing Jewish person is going to have a more conflicted and nuanced attitude towards the war in Gaza than either a full-throated defender of Palestinians will, or a person who's just, a lay person who all they do is see images of murdered babies, and that's the only conclusion that they can come to about what's going on over there. So needless to say, a Jewish Australian is likely to try to inject some kind of qualifications into it, which can be misconstrued as being a defense of like Zionist barbarism.
I think that was actually there was some qualifications around children and something, and then, but I mean, I think the main point to zoom out is people are kind of trying to cancel each other across the board. I mean, some would say it's more this or it's more that, and this is I think what the Adelaide Festival is essentially like the kind of peak insanity of this kind of like constant process of I'm going to cancel you, I'm going to cancel you, etc., rather than if you don't like the speaker, don't turn up to the session. If you don't like the festival platforming the speaker, don't go to the festival. If you really don't like the festival, write a letter, like do a podcast, like do something.
But aren't they basically operating in that system? I mean, the people who resigned from the festival would say that is what they're doing, that they're like, it's tricky to know when your participation is an endorsement and when it's merely participation.
But I mean, I think that's the problem. It's just like, okay, just because am I here now endorsing every single statement Josh says?
I certainly hope so.
Then, like, no one thinks that.
Yeah.
Right? Well, no, obviously, actually, clearly, some people do,
and some people do think that because I have you on the show, I'm endorsing everything that you say. I mean, people will say, like, you can't trust what Josh Zepp says. He talks to Candace Owens.
He talked to Tony Abbott.
Even worse.
Insane.
I mean, so there is this perception that if you like platform people,
I mean, but I think that's one of the things we absolutely have to get rid of, and I think pointing out the hypocrisy of the kind of cross cancellation is one of the ways to do that, and go, okay, everyone needs to stop doing this because it's just a kind of death spiral for the kind of conversations we have, and essentially eats away at our democratic fabric.
But then what happens when because there's a curation process in the appointment of these people in the first place.
Mm.
It's not like these. Like, I wrestle a bit with this in the sense that I don't believe that people should be hounded out of their jobs, or that we should work behind the scenes to try to coerce publishers or studios or networks or whatever into firing people, excommunicating them. We shouldn't be pressuring agents and managers from, or publicists from not working with people because their ideas are beyond the pale, so that they're functionally excluded from society. But when it comes to the case of, here is a literary festival that has made a conscious choice to elevate the views of this person who is speaking on behalf of what many people would regard as being a deluded or deranged or hate-adjacent worldview. I'm speaking theoretically here. I don't know enough about this activist's work to know if that's true, but that's the perspective of the people who wanted her cancelled. Then it's almost like the quote-unquote cancellation is really just an expression of pulling back from an overly sympathetic stance towards a particular worldview, rather than, like, nobody's, I don't think, or nobody that I would support is trying to get her to render her incapable of publishing future books or articles or going on podcasts or...
Well, you could argue that her being removed from the festival essentially does, and I think this might be one of the arguments she's making, kind of taints her reputation, reputational damage that then does impinge upon her ability to make... Probably means she sells... Well, actually, now she's probably
sells more.
Now she's totally selling more books, and now, etc. So it's probably that argument it might be a bit hard to make. But you could also see another situation where for someone actually them being removed from a festival or something does do kind of sustained reputational damage and does limit their ability to then go out and make money. I mean, I think it was in kind of hindsight. Well, I think... in foresight, you could have seen that this was a bad idea as far as I'm concerned, in terms of, I don't think she should have been. You invite someone, you live with it.
Yeah,
okay?
That's generally my attitude as well. Like, just make the decision carefully.
And then if that now makes your festival look silly, then so be it. Then you live with your decision, and then ask them difficult questions and say, why did you post this on October 8 in the context of post Bondi? Like, how do you situate your kind of past statements and activism,
Well, I also don't know what the context of her appearance was, though. Like, it may have just been her having a platform to read a passage from her book. Like,
but then so change it up.
Yeah,
we don't think this is enough, actually, given the new context.
Yeah, that's right.
So we want to we're going to invite you to have a conversation with Josh Steps.
Absolutely.
Or
invite
something.
me or another prominent Jewish Australian who's not a deranged, Netanyahu person to engage with her. That's absolutely right.
No one would have complained about that. And I think that would have been the right response, because clearly what was done was the wrong response. And now you've collapsed this whole festival, which, and I think made the whole situation far, far worse. And so there's some much bigger problem here in terms of, like, who's running these festivals, who's putting pressure. The people at the festivals don't seem to be able to resist sustained pressure, because it's not just this one. There's other ones, and you could point to other festivals around
there was the Bendigo Writers Festival, there was the Sydney Writers Festival,
where there's the people running the festival aren't really in charge of the festival. The mob is in charge of the festival,
right?
And everyone's kind of preemptively thinking about what the mob or various different mobs might do and how they need to kind of program and curate as a result. And I think that you're a director. I mean, you're just a director of a festival. I mean, it's kind of important, but it's also kind of not that important. It's like, I mean, I think where it becomes more difficult is the public money question, because if these were all kind of independent festivals, then you could go, well, you start your own festival, et cetera, et cetera. But here you are taking money from the public purse. And so there is a little bit of a zero-sumness in that sense about it, because someone else is not getting that public money. Still, it's like, I think you appoint someone for the duration and a period for 3 years or 5 years to run a festival, and then they get to run it the way they get to run it. And if people don't like it, people don't like it. I think there's just too much meddling.
I mean, the other
even though doesn't mean I agree. I would probably disagree with like 90% of what gets programmed at cultural festivals in Australia. And I think sometimes the Overton window they're drawing is either too narrow or too wide. But like, that's life. Like, you don't get to live inside your own Overton window. Like, you have to interact with other people's Overton windows and deal with it. Which isn't to say, like, obviously some people say, well, her comments were so aggressive that they made me, like, not just uncomfortable, but like, fear for my safety.
But that's bullshit. I mean, that's obviously bullshit.
But that would be the argument,
bullshit. Like, the amount, the conversation around safety is like, as we all know, so grossly inflated. I mean, I have so many, Gen Z friends and colleagues who just talk about safety as if it's just another synonym for comfort. So like, I don't want to go out wearing, like, I have
laziness.
I have gay friends who'll be like, I don't want to go out wearing this because I'm frequently made to feel unsafe. And when I actually,
what are they wearing?
It might be something flamboyant, right? But when I actually dig into it,
so that was victim blaming, right?
Well, what they mean is that someone will like raise an eyebrow or make a remark if they walk into a 7-Eleven and buy a pack of cigarettes while they're wearing a dress,
tube,
or whatever.
Yeah,
that's not. I mean, that could, in some circumstances, be an implied threat, but 90% of the time or more, that's going to be just someone finding it peculiar because it is peculiar in the context and remarking upon it.
I didn't know gay people smoked.
Exactly, that's right.
Unusual.
It raised an eyebrow, being like, "Really, Gen Z can afford $50 for a pack of cigarettes?" But the public money thing is interesting because not only does it introduce the phenomenon that you mentioned, which is that public money is scarce, so any money that's going towards X voice is not going towards Y voice, but it also means that there's another entity in the room exerting influence, which is
in this case
the state.
There was.
Yeah, so it seems that in this case, the premier of the state, i.e. the governor, had actually put in a call to, I can't remember who on the board, or the director or so, or the chair or something, saying, I'm getting a lot of people who are contacting me who are concerned about this particular speaker. I'm definitely not saying that your funding will be withdrawn, he said. And this is not an instruction because we're all at arm's length and this is not a politicized festival. You are absolutely independent. I just wanted to relay to you what I'm hearing. And of course, that's
although actually he was more explicit, like in the media, where he didn't kind of say not in terms of the pressure he put on, but he just said, she should have been cancelled.
Yeah.
So he did heartily endorse the cancellation. I think that is the dangerous space to be in as well, where senior government officials are basically directly pressuring festivals about who they can and cannot.
Yes, I mean, especially in the wake of snafus like at the ABC, where the former ABC chair, Ita Buttrose, would insert herself into editorial decisions about who and who shouldn't be on the air.
Someone who was hired for a week and had 2 or 3 days to go on their contract.
For 3 days, and then became a national hero because of that.
I think this is also the people who are in charge there are some competency problems in that there are these new kind of social phenomena that they don't know how to manage and handle. Like, they're in this kind of networked internet digital environment and they don't know how to deal when like this stuff pops up, and they know how to deal with it when it was the 80s. And then I'm not going to be kind of doing an anti-boomer rave here, but maybe it's going to slightly sound like that.
For some of them, they came of age in the 50s, depending on who we're talking about.
But I mean, it's like people are ill-equipped, I think, to deal with this new environment. The leadership of these kind of festivals and spaces and institutions don't know how to deal with them, because you kind of get, having run a kind of medium-sized NGO, you kind of get a little bit kind of not trapped, but you kind of sometimes feel like you're being puppeteered by the staff and you're not really actually in charge, because the staff have a lot more power now, which is good in many respects, but they also have this power of like insane reputational damage, because you can just get on the internet and just start saying things about you and say, oh, this person's bad because of X, Y, and Z. And you can't really do very much about it. You can go through defamation proceedings, etc. But you have this kind of children of the corn type situation where people in charge are not really in charge. And so there's kind of in some ways a whole new authority model that needs to be developed.
Well, they've come to believe that they're not in charge. You know,
well, yeah, they also exactly
like
because I think
they've just been way too cowed.
They have, and they're too cowardly. They've been way too cowardly, and they don't exert authority, which in some ways is interesting. Maybe this is a kind of switch to the Trump administration, which is they've just kind of gone, well, we just don't care, right? Because in some ways, the power of the kind of woke was to get senior people in leadership to care about what the repercussions might be for them. And as soon as you start going, well, I don't care, I'm not biting my tongue anymore, they lose all their power. I don't care about the consequences, etc. And then that's this kind of, I think has resulted, part of the backlash to that has resulted in this overly kind of muscular kind of, well, I really don't care. And I'm just like going to do whatever the hell I want, and then that also just kind of fuels the whole cycle.
Well, that's right. And whether they actually don't care about the mob, or whether they just care more about the mob that claims to be pushing back against the people who are too censorious on the left, is another question. Like, it's not like Trump and J.D. Vance and Stephen Miller are operating in an ecosystem that is detached from Megyn Kelly, Ben Shapiro, Tucker Carlson, Nick Fuentes. So, they've also got their cheerleaders and their mob.
But I guess also all those people operate in an environment where they're economically secure, whereas even if the mob comes for them, like Ben Shapiro's people can donate more money or he's going to be able to raise more capital for investments. Whereas if you're inside a kind of left-wing space, essentially your economic security is put at great risk because you're going to get removed from the economy, essentially, that you are part of. And so you have to. But I mean, if you're
Antoinette Lattouf, or you're this writer, or you are cancelled for a reason.
I mean more like a Louise Adler kind of thing. So if someone comes, like the festival director kind of thing, who's in that economy, who's like a senior person running a kind of progressive style institution, they're much more at the mercy of the kind of woke mob than like a kind of Megyn Kelly is, because like Megyn Kelly's not going to lose money or her position if a whole bunch of woke people come for her.
No, you're misunderstanding what I'm saying. The analog would be that there is a right-wing mob that fuels support for the Trump side of things, and that characterizes itself as being a reactionary backlash to the left-wing mob. Okay. But I'm just disputing your characterization that the left has a mob and then the right is just saying, we're not going to do mob politics because we don't give a fuck. I'm just sort of saying there's actually also a mob on the right that defines itself in its opposition to
I'm just saying
left-wing
that because they're outside of the kind of progressive economy.
But they're not outside of their own mob economy.
Oh, no, they're not. They have their own mob economy as well. And they can also have audience capture, et cetera, et cetera. But they're outside. They don't have to worry about getting cancelled in a way.
Well,
because the cancellations are mostly intramural.
That's right. But they could get cancelled by their own people if they strayed too far.
Yeah. Cancellation, I think, is mostly an intramural
Yes,
phenomenon,
definitely, obviously. I mean, almost by definition, because you have to have purchase within the clan in order to be able to exclude someone from the clan. Right? If they're outside of the clan already, you've got nothing to cancel them from. I mean, the mob dynamics is really interesting that you say that, because each side believes that they're not a mob, but that the other side is, right? So if you talk 100%. if you talk to one of the progressive types about what went on with the doxing of the Jewish creatives or the cancellation of Deborah Conway, the Jewish musician.
Well, she wasn't cancelled, but the
attempt. The mob that they will talk about is the nefarious network of fairly powerful Jewish Australians or Jewish people anywhere who use their connections to people in finance and the media and politics to influence things. So it's the WhatsApp group of, I think it was Lawyers for Israel or something like that, who were an extremely pro-Zionist group of lawyers who were agitating for the cancellation of people who were, too pro-Palestinian or something after October 7th. That's where they regard as being the locus of sinister mob power to be. On the other side, people who are more skeptical about the pro-Palestinian or woke or left progressive mob will view the actual mob with power as being this loose network of social media motivated people whose sympathies are always deranged by algorithms and by their own cluelessness about complicated issues like the Middle East, and who go on marches across the Harbour Bridge with people holding signs that say globalize the Intifada, even if they don't really know what they're talking about and couldn't tell you what happened in 1967. And so the people who are marching across the Harbour Bridge think that people in positions of power are too easily cowed by sinister, powerful forces who are pulling strings behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who object to the people who are marching across the Harbour Bridge in favour of Gaza think that people in positions of power are too easily cowed by outrages on Twitter and people writing earnest columns in The Guardian. And both sides are right.
We don't use the language liberal elites here in Australia.
Are too cowed by either. They're too cowed. They're too afraid of mobs on Twitter, and they're too afraid of angry letters from powerful individuals who are, trying to get somebody fired.
Yeah. But they're essentially operating in the same dynamic space, which is not to have a conversation, but essentially to exert other forms of power to remove people's voices, to silence them. And yes, and I agree. Both, it's probably more than one, but across the spectrum, most people don't seem to think that when they use the same tactics, they're doing anything wrong. Whereas I think the whole problem is the tactic, full stop. Because everyone's essentially, not everyone, many people are contributing to essentially degradation of the ability for us to have kind of sophisticated discourse about our society and where it is headed. And essentially that crumbles slowly into a kind of much less effective democracy. So I actually think it's actually existential, because you don't kind of see it. You don't see it crumbling in real time, or maybe there are moments where you kind of see it crumbling in real time, like last week or this week, but it's just kind of ebbing. It does feel like it's ebbing away in a way. And if we don't find a new way to kind of do things, then we're just going to get trapped in this spiral. And so what's the circuit breaker? Because it doesn't seem like Adelaide is going to be the circuit breaker. The backlash to the hate speech laws is interesting as a potential circuit breaker, because I was thinking the coalition and quite possibly the Greens were just going to go ahead with it, and now both of them have basically pulled out and said we're not. I mean, for different reasons, as you say. In some ways, the Greens did raise concerns about human rights and protest laws, but they also were saying, well, you need to add another 100 groups to these hate speech laws, because it's too narrow. It's not broad.
They're like, we want to be able to engage in the hate speech that we want to engage in, namely hate speech against Jews, or certainly coded hate speech against Jews, but really overt hate speech against Israel. And at the same time, we want to include a whole bunch more protections for the people who we favour.
But it's all that you can't. And you can't do that, and you can't. None of this works. Essentially, this model of trying to kind of finagle every single little bit of micromanaging speech is it's impossible. And the kind of proposals there are just going to end up. Essentially, we've been kind of quite fortunate of not going down the kind of UK. Well, not as far down the kind of UK line of all these kind of police door knocks and people getting arrested for tweets, and that largely, to my understanding, hasn't happened in Australia. But essentially these laws...
Can you just explain what you're talking about in the UK for people who aren't across it?
My understanding is that the statistic is that there are 12,000 arrests or visits per year in the UK from police for often what are called non-crime hate incidents. I think they've started to pull back a little bit on those because they just got so
And a non-crime hate incident could be your grandmother writing on Facebook, there are too many migrants in this country, or Muslims should go back to where they came from.
I don't recognize my street.
Yeah.
But sometimes they're more serious than that as well.
If they're really more serious, then they can reach the threshold of a crime.
Well, yeah, exactly. They don't reach the threshold.
They don't reach the threshold of crime. Vilification or intimidation or incitement.
Yeah,
then it would be in a different category.
Yeah,
presumably. So it is bonkers. And the fact that you get stories like Graham Linehan, the comedy writer who became a fairly, I would say, unseemly and deranged anti-trans person. I think he got too obsessed by that particular issue in ways that were unconstructive. Nonetheless, he wasn't calling for trans people to be beaten or rounded up and, or
there was something
or
about punching in the face at some point that was, I
think he was making a joke about
it was a joke, but it was a joke, and it didn't
super masculine and who was like 6 foot tall.
And it didn't require however many police to like turn up
so,
at Heathrow
long
Airport
story short, where he got off a plane from
him.
the States, and there were, a half dozen or whatever police officers there to arrest him for having done nothing, but for just having talked in ways that were mean,
and no
silly
actual
online,
not a serious threat to anyone in a physical sense.
So yes, we don't quite have that.
We haven't gone down that road yet, but this would totally send us down that road. These new hate speech laws, because
in the current incarnation, would they? And this is what I wanted to maybe argue with you about. I'm getting to the point where I'm less on your total free speech absolutist side.
Oh no, I wouldn't say I'm total free speech.
What would your position be
in terms of
dealing with the initial proposal post Bondi terrorist attack was to make it a crime to, it's already a crime to incite violence against people on the basis of their race or ethnicity, but it would make it would make hate speech against only the categories of race or ethnicity a crime. Now, I'm very leery. In fact, I'm more than leery. I'm super opposed to any kind of legislation that would criminalize people's opinions about beliefs. Beliefs. So I don't want any hate speech legislation to cover religion, because religion is a set of beliefs. You have to be able to criticize people's worldviews. That would be like outlawing criticism of Marxism or capitalism. Like, you have to be able to criticize Shintoism or Christianity or whatever. These are a set of ideas. But I do not have a huge problem anymore, given how crazy and deranged and hateful the world is becoming, with medium-sized cultures like Australia just going, you're just not going to be saying that people are vermin because of their race or ethnicity. But this thing, I think, just things that they don't have any control over, that are obvious, that they're wearing on their
but there's largely already laws for all of that. We've got so many hate speech laws at the state level and at the federal level, and we've had all these hate speech laws and they weren't. And in some ways they've been used, but in some ways they've been used in ridiculous ways, like the person who spotted a Nazi tattoo on someone's calf at the beach kind of thing, and then kind of essentially went and reported
Did that happen? Did it?
Yeah, in Newcastle.
Right.
Yeah, and it's like, do we want to go down that pathway? In some ways.
But what happened to the guy with the Nazi?
He got arrested. I don't know what the next stage of the process is, but
essentially, because you're no
and
longer allowed to
you can't. That's a hate
display.
It's a hate symbol,
Nazi insignia.
But also for me, I'm like, okay, cool. So thank you for telling me you're a Nazi.
Yeah.
Now I know you're a Nazi.
That's true.
So I'm actually not for outlawing that and Hezbollah flag, and that's like, okay, cool. You're affiliated with Hezbollah. Now I know. Like, now it's clear. And then,
but hang on. There's a distinction between intimidation and display, right? I mean,
I don't think it's intimidation to display a Hezbollah flag at a Palestinian march.
No, that's right. But if you're occupying the downtown of a city every single weekend with mass rallies that are chanting very enthusiastically a bunch of things that to a certain community will feel like intimidation. I mean, you had week after week
feel like intimidation. I think that's the problem. It feels like intimidation to that group.
Well,
and so we can't legislate on
you could
feelings.
Do a scientific test, and you could send a bunch of people wearing Jewish skull caps, yarmulkes, walking past these rallies, and if nothing happened to them and they weren't spat on and, shoved or punched, then I suppose you could say that it's not intimidation and they were all making it up in their heads. But the reality was that week after week after week in 2024, our cities, portions of our cities were rendered out of bounds for overtly Jewish people because of those rallies. So that, that's different from someone who simply spots a flag. Like, if you're a Muslim, if I go up to outside a mosque and I start and I drag a dead pig and I start waving it around, right?
That's very illegal.
Or some other gesture of obvious intimidation, or like, I don't know, what would they
on animal cruelty grounds? You're already in jail.
Even just in Israel, even if I was suicidal enough to wave a Star of David at them, that would be different from if I was.
But that's
simply
you're being actively
if I just had a Star of
antagonizing
David
in that
on my
sense
tattooed
as well.
on my calf, right? So
Yeah,
I
but
think
I
the
think-
laws should cover intentional. If they are going to exist,
Well, but
they
this
should
is
cover
that-
like intentional.
But in the
acts
new
of
ones, so you
intimidation.
don't even have to prove that someone was harmed. And so actually no one can be harmed.
Right.
And as I understand in the new laws, just a reasonable person could think that someone could be harmed.
Right.
And then you get 5 years in jail, as I understand it, kind of thing. So it's really taking it to extreme. And also, we had all these hate speech laws pre-Bondi, and did they stop Bondi?
Well, we didn't have all of them because they're talking about introducing them now.
Well, we have
But we
even
had
more,
some.
but we had a lot. And I don't think Bondi was caused by hate speech.
No.
That's the thing. So this is the wrong response.
This is the other reason why I feel some sympathy for the writer who was cancelled in the Adelaide Festival, because although, just to loop that back in, although you were saying, look, it probably enhances her profile actually to have been
she's
going
done
through all of
brilliantly
this.
out of this.
I would also say that I am empathetic to her because she's now being connected to a terrorist attack when there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever.
Totally.
In fact, she has
100%.
said that she doesn't support, violence for any reason. So she's obviously, and I do think it's really unfair and it's really delicate balance, right? Because I wrote a column for the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age a few weeks ago, which some people interpreted as making this link between pro-Palestine, pro-Gaza protests and the Bondi attack. I was very careful to say that I don't think that there's a link. What I was saying was we have not been at our best in turning the volume up on cool-headed reason and turning the volume down on sloganeering. And I think that a climate which encourages knee-jerk groupthink is a climate that is more conducive to people acting, to nudging crazy people who are religious fanatics over the edge, which does not mean that I think that someone like her or someone who innocently just has a strident opinion against Israel is necessarily a cause of terrorism. But there's enough of a connection in the degradation of the conversation to make it problematic.
I mean, I think the issue there is that, so if you look at, say, the March for Australia, so these is kind of anti-immigration rallies.
These are sort of right-wing white.
Yeah. Well, actually, sometimes at least in some of the videos I've seen, there will be kind of like newer migrants who are like,
nationalists.
they don't know. Well, so there were like National Socialist Network, actual neo-Nazis who turned up. And my understanding, there's quite a lot of like internal policing, which is like, get out. We don't want you here, because obviously it made it look really, really, made all the people marching look really, really, really bad. I don't think that the same thing happened in the kind of pro-Palestine movement, where it's like, oh wait, actually you're really far out there group. Like, you're not welcome to like turn up at our space anymore. You're actually going to make us look really, really bad. Actually, it was kind of papered over, and it was there was no kind of internal discipline mechanism, which actually the progressives are normally good at internal discipline these days.
When they want to be.
So basically to say, no, you're not part of our movement, you're just way, way too far out there. So, I mean, I think part of the problem is that Australia tends to go for like technocratic solutions to everything. And I don't think the problem is a kind of problem of technocracy. Do we need more laws? We need to micromanage this? We need to micromanage that. We have all this safety stuff as well that we could talk about. Teen social media ban. Like, everything is a kind of like technocratic legal problem to be solved, rather than actually a political problem, or problem that would actually be in some ways a harder conversation to have. And I also think part of the issue, as you were kind of saying with Bondi, is that I see that essentially as a kind of security and intelligence failure. I mean, these guys were like, one of them was already had been on an ASIO, our kind of FBI or CIA kind of intelligence agency watch list. They'd gone to the southern Philippines. Like, literally a well-known kind of like extremist hotspot had not been questioned on the way back in. Apparently, they'd even written that they went to Mindanao.
Is that right? I was wondering.
At least in their
about
arrival cast of the Philippines, I
Right.
definitely know that they did, and some of them said they had on the way back, but I cannot confirm. But it's like you would think that you might get stopped and asked a couple of questions coming back into the country. Oh, where have you been? Oh, Southern Philippines. Oh, interesting. Tell us about.
Or even
why
if
you
you're not
went there.
stopped there, that your name would get sent up the chain.
So many red flags, and nothing comes up. And so this is why it's like, for me, part of this is also all a diversion from essentially failures of the government to say, well, it wasn't us, it wasn't we, the government and the security intelligence services that failed. It was all the hate speech. It was all the kind of bad people on the streets. It was all of this, that, and the other. And so it's this kind of dragnet approach to kind of trying to like deal with the problem, whereas actually you just need a kind of like, you just should be spearfishing, not kind of like drift net fishing across the whole of society.
Point. I would disagree a bit, but mainly on the question of hate speech as it relates to religious fanaticism. I think you're right that the government wants to distract blame from its intelligence failures. I think the easiest way that it's doing that is by going to its safest and most popular territory, which is guns. It's funny that after every atrocity, each country will go to the easiest thing that builds the greatest consensus.
Yeah.
So in Australia, that's gun restrictions. In America, where gun restrictions are incredibly unpopular, it's mental health or whatever. Right? After a mass shooting, nobody talks about guns except for the people who are already super enthusiastic about restricting guns. It's always like, well, let's talk about the underlying issues of, the problems with young men or like mental health or something like that. Here, the easier terrain for them to retreat to is let's talk about making it harder to get guns. But I think that the
problem is that they already did that once, and so it becomes a little bit harder to.
Yeah, although it's atrophied quite a lot. So my understanding
there is a little bit. I mean, not
quite a lot
being able to get a gun as a non-citizen, I was actually quite shocked that you can be a non-citizen and own multiple firearms.
And own multiple firearms. That's right, and also be that close to someone who has been on a
intelligence watch list.
Watch list. No, but I mean, part of the problem is that the gun law restrictions were brought in almost 30 years ago, and the technology of guns has been moving so rapidly that there's this constant game of whack-a-mole where the authorities are supposed to classify them into these. But
I'm also of the thing of like, okay, so next time they'll get a car and they'll drive it down.
Sure.
Then they'll grab knives and they'll grab data. Like if someone really wants to do something horrible, they will find.
Yeah, but I mean, that's always the bullshit talking point of the NRA. I mean, it's like, they will, and it'll also happen. It'll also just happen less frequently. And I mean, you only have to look at places. that are
I'm not like
for
zero like
places that aren't.
I don't think children should be given guns for their 5th birthday or anything.
No, but I just mean that is always the argument, but it's just not borne out. There are 190 countries in the world, and there's a very close correlation between once you hold for all of the other factors. People can always point to like Switzerland or something.
But I would largely say the problem with this incident was not kind of. Well, there was some problem with their access to guns, but it wasn't kind of like the main thing. And I think what you're saying is right, is that the government essentially is deflecting kind of responsibility, and they kind of go, we need to be seen to be doing something because you're not allowed to be seen to, you can't just say, don't just do something, stand there kind of thing, which in some ways, I don't think they need very many new laws, and they certainly don't need to.
No, but I mean,
they certainly don't need to produce hundreds of pages of them and then give people 2 days to comment on them.
G'day, humans. Well, if you've listened to this much of the episode, then you must enjoy it, presumably, unless you're just listening for masochistic reasons. So you should listen to the rest of it. And the way you do that is by subscribing to the premium feed, where you not only get to hear the rest of this delightful conversation, and trust me, it gets better than what you just heard, but you also get to hear no ads, 0 ads. And previously, up until now, you had to go to the old Substack to do that and follow me on Substack and add one more platform to your life if you're not already on Substack. But here's the thing. We are now on Apple Premium Podcast as well. So with one click, Apple will just subscribe you up to the premium feed. You'll be able to listen to the rest of this conversation right now. So open up your Apple Podcasts, click the old Pay Old Zepsy button. That's probably what it's called, Pay Old Zepsy. And you click the button, and then you no longer have to be a free rider. you can feel like you're contributing to the mission of this show, which is really what we're all here for: better conversations, a freer, more freewheeling attitude towards the things that we can talk about, a way to steel man our opponents and to take the most gracious approach towards disagreement. That is what you're voting for when you vote for Uncomfortable Conversations by going into your Apple Podcasts and clicking subscribe. I love you. If you don't do that, that's fine. I'll see you the next free episode, I guess. Take care.